On the memorizing phone numbers, one of the tricks in my book is if you got a kid who's old enough that they're going to be spending time away from you, but not yet old enough to have memorized your phone number, take their favorite device, change their password to your phone number.
Coming to you from the 80/20 Conflict Management Headquarters in Edmonton, Alberta, this is the Timeline of Self-Defense with your host, Randy King.
What is up, Internet, and welcome to the Timeline of Self-Defense podcast, the show where we break down real-world violence using my before, during, and after model. This whole thing is built on the same framework you'll find in my upcoming book, The Timeline of Self-Defense Before, During, and After Violence, coming out May 5th, 2026 with YMAA Publishing. And yeah, it's still a podcast. We just borrow the pacing of a late-night talk show because safety tips go down a little bit better when they don't feel like homework. Every week I sit down with experts, survivors, and coaches to dig into what actually works in the self-defense world. If you want my full interview, all 10 of my questions, bonus conversations, or you're looking to bring me in for a keynote, public speaking event, or a hands-on workshop, just head to randykinglive.com. Everything is there, including my socials. Now, let's make you a little bit safer and start the show. It's time for Red Flags and Reality. Welcome back to Red Flags and Reality, the part of the show where we take the headlines you might scroll past and turn them into lessons that can actually keep you safer. Tonight, we are in the before stage of the timeline, looking at family safety and how to protect kids before anything ever happens. Our first story tonight comes out of Tennessee. Tennessee just became the first state in the U.S. to introduce mandatory gun safety classes for children as young as 5. The lessons are simple. Don't touch a gun if you find one, and tell an adult right away. The program is run by trained educators, and it's not about fear, it's about habits. The takeaway here, knowledge is armor. The earlier kids learn to spot danger and respond calmly, the more likely they'll prevent accidents before they ever happen. Next up, the Say Something Anonymous tip line created by Sandy Hook Promise has now been credited with preventing 18 planned school shootings and stopping over 700 youth suicides. It gives students a safe, anonymous way to report warning signs without worrying about retaliation. The reality here? Before violence erupts, kids need safe exits and trusted ways to speak up. A simple phone call or text can stop the unthinkable before it starts. Next up, experts are pushing back against the old stranger danger messaging. Instead of teaching kids to be scared of people they don't know, the advice is now to teach them to recognize unsafe behaviors, like secrecy, manipulation, or pressure, even when it comes from people they do know. Real safety means giving kids practical tools, knowing their address, having a family code word, staying in groups, and trusting their gut. The lesson here, don't just tell kids to be afraid, teach them how to think and identify problematic behaviors. And finally, a study on family safety education found that most parents only teach safety skills after something dangerous has already happened. The research shows that kids learn best when education is proactive, consistent, and matched to their world, not just when adults feel scared. The reality here, don't wait for a close call to teach safety. The right time is always before it happens. So what do these stories tell us? That prevention isn't paranoia. Whether it's teaching a 5-year-old what to do if they see a gun, giving kids a voice to stop violence, or rethinking outdated things like stranger danger advice, the before stage is where families can make the biggest difference. With all that said, let's get to our guest. Today we're in the before stage of the timeline with my friend Jason Brick, founder of the safest family on the block. Jason is a family safety expert who's helped thousands of parents bring security into everyday life without living in fear. In this episode, we're digging into prevention through family culture, what you can teach your kids today that will help keep them safer tomorrow. Now let's get into the interview. You've written entire books on defensive living. What does that mean in simple terms for the average family? Like, what is defensive living?
So the best way that I've found to describe it is the job is to create systems to acquire equipment and acquire skills so that you can turn a tragedy into an emergency and turn an emergency into an inconvenience. Classic example being, and this is advice I got from Nick Hughes, is whenever he buys a new pair of shoes, the old pair of shoes goes in the trunk of his car. So that way, if you get in a car wreck or a breakdown and you run out of gas when you're on the way home from the beach in flip-flops, or it's date night and your wife's wearing stilettos, you got comfy, broken-in shoes to wear to the walk to the gas station. It takes an emergency and turns it into an inconvenience. And so anything we can do, whether we're talking about crime prevention or any other kind of harm to our family, setting things up so that we can reduce the amount of harm that a situation creates.
Parents often struggle between preparing their kids and scaring them. How do you teach safety without making kids afraid of the world?
I think the first thing to remember is that if your child is old enough to understand the safety conversation, whatever that conversation is, whether you're talking about how to cross the street, or whether you're talking about what stranger to approach if you need help, or whether you're rehearsing your fire plan, if they're old enough to understand the conversation you're about to have, they've already been exposed to the fear of the risk through television, through media, through their friends, through their teachers. Kids are smart and they pay attention. That's what they're built for. And so by the time they can understand you explaining a fire plan, they've already thought about the house burning down. And so what would you prefer? That your kid be aware of the risk of child trafficking, for example, but have no idea what you're doing to protect them and no idea how to protect themselves, or whether they're aware of that and they know that mom and dad, or dad and dad, or mom and mom, or dad, or whatever the constellation is, has thought about it and has a plan and is taking steps. And also, here are the things you personally can do at your personal age, whether you're 5-year-old or 7-year-old or 15-year-old, to participate in your own rescue. Which of those is a more empowering way to live in?
I agree, obviously. And I think this thought process of knowledge is scary and we shouldn't give it to people almost makes people more vulnerable to situations. We know that small habits can create massive safety improvements. What's the easiest change someone can make today to help out themselves and their family?
Okay, so I'm going to split that up. I'm going to give two answers. One is the simplest and one is the easiest. Simplest and easiest are not the same thing. Simplest is put your phone in your pocket. Not the easiest. For many of us, it's a habit. I'm bordering on to addiction. It's what we do automatically. And as my friend Alan Burris, who I think you also know, says, get your head out of your apps. Having that phone in your pocket when you're walking down the street, having it in the next room when you're talking to your kid, having it put away when you're driving. I mean, I'm so bad about the driving one. I now have a deal with my kids that if they catch me interacting with my phone while I'm behind the wheel, they get to pick the music for the rest of the ride. That's how bad it was for me. But using that device when it's time to use that device and putting that device away when we're doing other things, instead of having it be that thing we're also doing all the time, is the simplest, but I'll agree that not the easiest way to help keep our kids safe, and because we see the trouble coming. Now, the easiest, man, is just talk to our kids. Talk to our kids more. Just about everything. There's a whole line, again, that's probably is neither simple nor easy, about, as parents, one of the biggest things we can do, because having open lines of communication with our kids is the best way that we can keep them safe. Because they'll come to us for advice, they'll come to us when we have trouble, and we'll be able to notice the small changes in their behavior and demeanor that indicate they have trouble they haven't brought to us. And keeping those lines of communication open starts by overcoming the training many of us got, which was, a lot of our parents, and I always want to preface anytime I say I'm doing things different from my parents with saying that my parents are great and I love my parents. They were acting with the best information available to them. But many of our parents, people our age, they believed that the way you properly parented was, if your kid has a bad day, for example, at school, your job is to make their day worse the second they get. And to overcome that, instead, without letting them off the hook, talk to them about, okay, well, that sucked. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to help with that? What do you need? What went wrong? And how can I help you meet the natural consequences of that mistake with maturity and grace? But not, you're grounded for 3 weeks on top of the suspension you got at school because you bopped poor Jimmy in the nose after he called you a dirty name. Just wait till your father gets home I think we've learned better than that.
How do you teach families to recognize red flags in their environment before trouble starts?
That's a tricky one. And the best thing is to pay attention. I'm not a fan of condition yellow, the Cooper color codes. It's a macho paranoiac viewpoint towards situational awareness. I'm much more of a fan of Thich Nhat Hanh's mindful awareness, joyful awareness, where you just take a breath and look at the world and lead by example. You walk outside, you'll see the car speeding across the street. You'll see that guy who's kind of sketchy around the corner behind the bush, but you'll also see the pretty sunset and that the roses are blooming and that kitten walking down the street would really like a scratch behind the ears. That mindful awareness, what I sometimes call tactical curiosity, shows you both of those sides of the world, and then you make your informed decisions.
You work with people from all walks of life, literally kids and adults and businesses and all that sort of stuff. What is the most common safety mistake you see them making?
Okay, so other than that thing about not talking to the kids about the safety issue, I think it's multitasking. just in general. And I'll give a second answer, which is they'll hate even more. That multitasking idea, again, because our phones are kind of that thing we do while we're doing the thing, because the idea of multitasking is popular in productivity circles in a lot of places. But when we're trying to do two things at once, you're a martial artist, I'm a martial artist. I learned this when I was wrestling. If I can make my opponent think about two things at once, he's going to do neither of them effectively. And it's true for everything else. And so if we're driving, we're driving. If we're talking about our kid's new boyfriend, we're talking about the kid's new boyfriend. If we're having that boyfriend over for dinner, we're having them over for dinner. Just to do things one at a time, and remembering. The other mistake we're making is we're not doing enough cardio.
Sure.
I mean, bottom line, if you look at the top causes of death for adults, cardio helps with about 3 of them. So if you don't have good enough cardio, you're not going to be able to run from a threat. You're not going to be able to run to your child when they're in threat. So Zombieland's rule number 1 is also our rule number 1. And also, not for nothing, cardio sucks. We all know cardio sucks. If your kid sees you on a daily basis or every other day or whatever, going and doing something that sucks because it's important to do it, you're modeling discipline for your child. And that's immensely powerful.
How do you approach safety planning for public places like malls, concerts, or airports where families spend time together?
2 sets of preparation. The first is you have a general plan for going out into the world. And that's something that your family discusses to the degree that different ages can understand and internalize different levels of detail. But you have a default going out plan. And that includes things like, have you talked to kids who are young enough to need that help, how to identify a safe stranger if they get separated from you? Are you going to take a family photo before you leave the house, which I recommend, especially if kids are under 10. Take that little family photo, and then if you lose track of your kid, instead of, while you're panicking, trying to remember what T-shirt your kid was wearing that day, you just text the security guy their photo, and then it goes to everybody in the building within 3 seconds. And having a set schedule that includes a break so that you can take a minute and a breather and assess everybody, knowing which thing each adult and teen is responsible for. Where if you got 2 adults and 2 kids, one of you is watching one kid, one of you is watching the other kid, and that knowing that ahead of time and having that as a default discussed plan, including your rally point if you get separated. And then from there, you take that default plan, which you just know, and then you make any adjustments or changes or updates based on where you're headed. So, for example, you have a rally point, but you don't know what your rally point is. So as you're walking into the fair, you say, okay, if we get separated, we meet at the Ferris wheel. Walking in the mall, if we get separated, we meet at the food court, and anything like that. So you have the default plan and then the details on that plan. And that applies not only to those little outings, but it applies to something as big as going abroad for 2 weeks. I think you remember my family had spent last year in Crete. And so we were able to take that same basic plan and apply it to a year-long international vacation. And on the memorizing phone numbers, one of the tricks in my book is if you got a kid who's old enough that they're going to be spending time away from you, but not yet old enough to have memorized your phone number, take their favorite device, change their password to your phone number. And because my wife, you said it was discourteous not to know people's phone numbers, my wife has changed my password to her phone number. Because before that, it was Siri, call Rachel. So yeah, what's funny is I still don't know it, but my fingers know it.
How do you bridge the gap when it comes to personal safety between somebody who knows something with martial arts and somebody who's brand new to the space?
Okay, for me, my wife is a very smart woman. She's very savvy. She grew up in a major metropolitan area, Toronto, as a woman, spent her 20s and most of her 30s as a single woman living in a city. So she has good safety instincts, probably better than mine. I'm a 6'5", 6 foot, almost 6 foot college and high school wrestler with a martial arts background, grew up in the suburbs. My safety chops are not what hers are, but she's not really got any martial arts experience whatsoever. Her viewpoint about a black belt is she has one and she's not afraid to use him, right? So I run it by her. She's a smart, motivated person who doesn't know the jargon and the terminology and has a different context with violence than I do. And so it passes her sniff test. And that's also one of my pet peeves of the self-defense martial arts industry in general, where, a lot of the people out there teaching are former Marines, Navy SEALs. Like Ken Emerson gives some great advice. He's a smart man, served in his country. I have immense respect for him. But his context with violence is different from ours, and ours is different from your average soccer mom or minivan dad. And so, being able to speak to the proper context is really important. And my wife really keeps me honest on that.
In your view, what does real world situational awareness look like when you're juggling things like kids, groceries, or a busy day?
So the big part on that is just being able to focus where you can focus, especially when you're juggling kids, right? The busy day is just a matter of, all right, I'm doing this now and I'll do that in a moment. And in the real world, often knowing where you need to do that and where it's safe to kind of to meander. For example, you're going grocery shopping, and we'll take the kid out of the equation for a moment just to simplify the idea. When you're in a grocery store, you are probably safe enough to just kind of interact with the grocery list, make sure the melons are ripe, and think about cooking dinner or send a quick text to your spouse, to your partner, right? It's a grocery store. Most parts of North America, you're safe in a grocery store. In that parking lot between the door and your car, that is not the time to be thinking about things other than going from the parking lot to your car, right? From door to door, because there's traffic running around, there's kids running around. And as we know, parking lots being transitional spaces are where bad guys look for people to attack. So knowing the places where you can kind of multitask, as we talked about before, or take your eye off the ball a little bit, and the places where it's time to be focused up. And then when you're juggling kids, it's a whole other thing. Because, even in those situations where you need to be focused, that, of course, is when they need to go to the bathroom. That, of course, is when all of a sudden they've forgotten how to walk. That is when they really, really, really want to tell you all about that YouTube video. And so, again, then we can talk to our kids. You can use those times as early as we can to talk about, hey, we're in a parking lot now. There's cars in parking lots. And I need you to help me. I'm going to watch in front of us. Could you watch behind us? Let me know if a car's coming. And involve the kid in your awareness, playing situational games, count the exits, assign each kid a direction to watch. And those are the ways that you can integrate situational awareness into the real life of the modern parent. It really works. And often they'll catch stuff you didn't, because it's especially powerful in that 3 to 9 or 10 range, where they're not used to being asked for help by their parents. They're used to being the recipients of help from their parents. So if you as the parents say, hey, I need you to do this important thing for and with me, that's when their chest puffs up and they're on the case. And because I mentioned asking kids for help, obligatory thing about another thing to communicate to kids, stranger dangerous nonsense, which is not that it was the worst advice we got when we were kids. But if an adult who's not me asks you for help, if a stranger asks you for help, that's a problem. Adult strangers ask adult strangers for help. They don't ask kids for help.
If you could teach every parent one safety rule for their kids, what would that number one rule be?
It would be that thing I talked to about earlier about maintaining open, honest, fearless communication with your kids. And one of the places that starts with is that managing when they get in trouble with the world, not getting them in extra special trouble at home. Managing our own emotions. I actually recently interviewed for my show a woman, and I'm so embarrassed, so sad that I can't remember her name right now. But her whole coaching is about, we know that kids don't have fully developed brains. And it helps my mental health when I'm having moments with my kids to remember that, to just treat them like they're drunk adults, because that's about where the decision making is. And I just remember, well, how would I respond to my brother if he had a few too many beers at the family reunion? I wouldn't be yelling at him and grounding him. But anyway, their brains aren't fully developed. Their frontal cortex, the part of their brain that is responsible for emotional regulation and intelligent approach to problem solving, isn't fully developed. When we get stressed out by our kids, the hormone loan we get also means our prefrontal cortex is going out the window too. So we are compromised as well. And recognizing that and giving ourselves permission to say, hey, you know what? You were home late and you didn't call, and that scared me so bad that I need a minute before I can talk to you in the way that we deserve to talk to each other in this house. And then walking away, giving yourself permission to take that break before you come back and engage. So there's two aspects of that open communication and weaponized honesty, I like to call it, with our kids, so that they know that you're a reliable, loving asset who will be there for them when they have trouble.
What is the one takeaway from our discussion you wish people knew, would do, or would implement?
Which I think we know as parents, we're responsible for protecting our kids. I think most parents have that moment when they're looking at their child, whether that's a baby. Like my first son was 7 when we adopted him. And you kind of think, man, this situation calls for an adult. And then you realize you're the adult that the situation calls for. And then most of us, now this is family friendly, But most of us immediately have this thought in the back of our head when we realize, oh man, I'm the person who's responsible here. And it's this thing in the back of our heads that rhymes with duh. But we're not only responsible, but we are also fully capable. Most of the skills, most of the things I talked about today, it's not something we can't do. Most of it's not something we didn't know. Maybe I just cast it in a slightly different light that made it easier to see. And so we are responsible for the safety of our kids. We know that. And we're far more capable than we give ourselves credit for, and far more capable than most of those Facebook ads about self-defense and safety like to pretend that we are.
Let's wrap this all up with takeaways. Here's my takeaways from an interview you just listened to with Jason Brick for the before phase of the timeline. First, build systems that downgrade risk. Jason's mantra is to turn a tragedy into an emergency and an emergency into an inconvenience. The Nick Hughes shoe trick nails it. When you buy new shoes, toss the old pair in your trunk. Breakdown in flip-flops on the highway? It's no longer a crisis, it's just a walk. Small systems like that, spare meds, chargers, family rally points, means your family gets inconvenience, not wrecked. Second, empower kids instead of scaring them. If they're old enough for the safety talk, they're already aware of the fear from school, media, or friends. So don't leave them guessing. Give them roles they can handle. Spotting safe strangers, knowing the rally point, or helping check for cars in a parking lot. Knowledge beats vague fear every single time. Third, simplify and connect. Jason's simplest upgrade? Put your phone away when you need to focus. Driving, crossing parking lots, listening to a kid. And the easiest upgrade? Talk more. Keep the lines of communication open so your kids bring their problems to you and so you can spot changes in their behavior sooner. Communication is prevention. Fourth, practice mindful awareness, not paranoia. Jason rejects the always in condition yellow mindset. Instead, he teaches tactical curiosity. Breathe. Notice a sketchy guy by the bushes, but also the sunset and the roses. Be present in the world and teach your kid to join in. Count exits, aside watch directions, play the awareness games. It keeps them safer and makes them feel trusted. Bonus hack I love from Jason, change a kid's device password to your phone number until they've memorized it. Also, don't forget cardio. It protects your health, it lets you run away from trouble, or it shows your kids what disciplined effort looks like. Finally, reality check advice with people outside the operational bubble. Context matters. The safest family on the block is built for the real lives we actually live. Bottom line here is this. Family safety isn't about fear. It's about systems, empowerment, connection, and awareness. Put those together and you're doing exactly what Jason wants. You're building the safest family on the block. Huge thanks to Jason Brick for joining me. His book, Safest Family on the Block, is coming out through YMAA, same publisher as mine, and it packs 101 hacks, tips, tricks, and habits you can start using right away. You can find it through YMAA Publishing, Amazon, and bookshops.org, or check out his website, safestfamilyontheblock.org. And hey, if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, hit all the buttons, bells, whistles, arrows, and share with a parent who needs it. Also, catch new episodes every single Wednesday. Next week, we move into the during phase with our first repeat guest, Terry Trahan, on surviving close quarter edge weapons in the during phase of the timeline of self-defense. And hey, thanks for listening and stay safe out there.